Hey guys, so today we are going to be talking about interest. And before we do that though, I want to review a little bit about decimals, fractions, and percents and their relationships because that's going to help us when we think about interest because interest is typically done in percents. But when we punch things into our calculator, when we think about things, sometimes we need to be able to convert them between fractions and decimals. So first of all, if we think about a whole, right? Like let's think about it like 100, and we can kind of keep like money in the back of our heads when we're thinking of this because that just makes it a little bit easier for us. So if we're thinking about $100 as our whole, then when we think about what 10% of that would be, we think about breaking this $100 into groups, into 10 different groups. Okay, so each of these represents one of the 10 groups that we're breaking our 100 into, right? And we can see that when we do that, they're broken up into groups of 10, okay? So 10 groups of 10 equals 100. So that is like our fraction, right? And if we're thinking about just 10% of that, that would mean we're just thinking about one of these groups of 10, okay? So that represents, this 10 represents 10% of 100 because we know percents are always out of 100. If I was going to write this as a fraction, I would have one piece of those 10 groups of 10 that I had, or 1/10. Okay. When we write that as a decimal, remember that as a percent, it's, in this case, it's as a whole number. So I have 10. Right now, my decimal point would be right here. Okay. When we try to convert things into decimals, though, from a percentage, we need to envision that decimal place moving 2 spots to the left, okay? And then you can see where my new decimal point ends up, right? It's in front of that 10. So this right here, 0.10, is the same thing as 0.1 because with decimals, remember, we can kind of imagine we can add as many zeros or take off as many zeros up until we have a digit larger than 0 here. So this is the same thing, okay? All right, so now I want to go a little bit into interest. Hopefully that helps you understand where we get these numbers from. We'll bring back the manipulatives if we need to later. But with interest, remember, it's like paying money to borrow money. Okay, because like when you, right now you guys are, kind of young. If you were going to borrow money, your parents would probably be like, yeah, like, maybe they would say, here's $20, pay me back when you can. And you could just pay them back $20. But when you're an adult and you need bigger amounts of money, people don't have that. So you have to go to places like a bank or something like that to get larger amounts. And so things for like a mortgage on your house or a car loan, right? Because you don't typically have that much money just sitting in your account. Maybe a credit card might have an interest rate. So it's basically like you're paying rent on money, okay, that you're like borrowing. So it's like paying so that you can borrow somebody else's money because you don't have it at the time. So let's just give an example here. We're going to talk about today, we're just going to talk about simple interest, because I want you to understand that first, and then we'll go into compound tomorrow. I'll make a separate video. All right, so let's just say that I want to borrow $100. Okay, so I go to my bank and I say I would like to borrow $100. So if I pay it back right away, right, like they give it to me, I just give it back to them, then in year 0, we call that year 0, I would be paying back just the $100. Okay, but that doesn't happen where people just walk into the bank and like say I'd like to borrow $100 and then give it right back. So after year 1, right, I have, let's say that the interest rate in this case, interest rate is 10%. Okay, interest rates are typically in percentages. So then in order to calculate that, I would have my $100, right, from before, and then I would have to figure out what this percentage is as a decimal, which is why I went through this stuff up here. Okay, so remember when we moved our decimal point over 2 spots, we saw that the new decimal that we can then multiply by is 0.1 or 0.1. So equals 0.1. Okay, so then I have to multiply this by 0.1, or I can add, I know that 0.1, if we remember here, of our $10 or of our $100 was 10. Okay, so I could just add on, so plus my $10. Okay, so I would have $110 that I would then have to pay back if it was at 10%. 110. Okay. Then year 2 comes along, right? So, okay, now I have my $100 plus my $110 that I had from year 1 plus another $10, right? Because it's 10% of that 100. So another 10%, I should say. Okay, so now I have my $100 or my 110, sorry, because that's how much I had here. I keep forgetting. Plus another $10. So now I would have $120 that I would have to pay back after 2 years. Okay, and we could keep going, right? After 3 years, I would have whatever my amount here was, 120 plus another $10 would be $130, right? And so we just keep kind of adding this on. So, right, you can imagine year 4, we would have 140, year 5 would be 150, right? And we would just keep going like that. Now, what am I trying to do? Oh, yeah, after 10 years, I wanted to go there. So after 10 years, how much money will I have to pay back? Like, what would this number be? I want you to think about that in your head. Okay, so, right, after 10 years, I would have my original 100 plus, after each year, you're adding 10 more dollars. That would mean that I have $200 altogether. So 100 would be my original amount. It's also called the principal. That's what that original number is called. Principal. And then I would have $100 in my interest. So with simple interest, you're just taking the last number and adding whatever the percentage on was that you were borrowing was onto that number. Okay, it's just going up by a constant amount every time. So like in this case, it was always going up by 10. All right, so I hope that makes sense. I will make another video for tomorrow on the compound interest.